The drum bearing was shot. I could feel it through the control lever, that telltale wobble when metal starts giving way under pressure. 28 years running cranes, and you learn to read the machine like reading your own pulse. I'm Wade Harrison, 49 years old, and that Tuesday morning should have been routine. Just another day on the Crosstech Properties job site, converting an old textile factory into luxury lofts for tech workers with more money than sense. But when I felt that bearing grinding against its housing, I knew we had a problem that wasn't going away. The load waiting below was a 12-ton vintage steel beam, supposedly the centerpiece of some Instagram-worthy exposed ceiling design. The client, Jackson Cross, had been filming everything for weeks, treating our construction site like his personal content studio. Kid made his fortune trading cryptocurrency and figured that qualified him to flip historic buildings. I pulled my leatherwork gloves tight, feeling the worn spots where 3 decades of steel cable had left their mark. The gloves were Navy issue, same pair I'd worn in Iraq with the Seabees. Some habits stick with you. I keyed the radio with my thumb. Tony, this is Wade. We're shut down up here. Main drum bearings failing. Tony Walsh came back immediately. He was a good site supervisor, been running crews for 15 years. Wade, what's the repair timeline looking like? Full bearing replacement. Day minimum if we can source the parts locally. Maybe 2 days if we have to order from Liebherr. I was already climbing down from the cab to show him the problem. You don't diagnose bearing failure over the radio. Some things require hands-on demonstration. The memory hit me halfway down the ladder. Fallujah, 2004, forward operating base construction under a scorching Iraqi sun. We had a 10-ton crane lifting generator sections for the new communications bunker. My buddy Tommy Rodriguez was directing the lift from ground level when I noticed the cable fraying near the drum connection. Just a few broken strands. Nothing dramatic. I should have shut down immediately. Should have followed the safety protocols we drilled at Camp Pendleton. Instead, I figured we could finish the one lift, then address the cable during the next maintenance cycle. Command wanted that generator online by evening, and stopping meant explaining delays to officers who'd never operated anything heavier than a clipboard. Tommy was standing directly under the load when the cable let go. 10 tons of diesel generator dropped 40 feet onto concrete, and Tommy never saw it coming. Good kid from El Paso, planning to use his GI Bill for engineering school when his tour ended. The memorial service was held in a dust storm that lasted 3 days. That's why I always shut down for equipment defects now, always. No exceptions, no matter who's paying the bills or setting the deadlines. By the time I reached ground level, Cross had appeared from his air-conditioned trailer, phone already in hand, live streaming to his followers. He was wearing designer athleisure that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment, talking to his camera like the construction site existed purely for his entertainment. Okay, tech crowd, we're here at the Riverside Lofts conversion, about to place the signature beam that's going to make this space absolutely fire, Cross was saying, gesturing toward the steel beam waiting on the flatbed truck. I walked over to Tony, who was studying his tablet with the day's schedule. Cross barely glanced up from his phone screen. The bearings worn beyond operational tolerance, I told Tony. Tapered roller assembly is shot. Metal's grinding metal in there. Tony nodded. He'd seen enough equipment failures to recognize the signs. How bad? Bad enough. If I put 12 tons on that drum with the bearing seized, the cable's going to jump the groove. Physics doesn't negotiate. That's when Cross finally looked up from his live stream. Whoa, hold up. What's this about shutdowns? I've got content scheduled, Mr. Cross, I said, keeping my voice level. The crane's main drum bearing has failed. It's not safe to operate. Cross laughed, actually laughed. Not the kind of laugh you hear when something's funny, but the dismissive bark rich people make when working-class expertise conflicts with their timeline. Dude, you sound exactly like my dad. Always with the worst-case scenarios. He turned to his phone camera. Sorry about this, guys. Some of the old-school crew is being a little overcautious today. I felt my work gloves tighten across my knuckles. 20 years ago, that comment would have earned him a demonstration of what old school really meant. But I'm 49, not 29, and I've got Emma's college tuition to think about. Navy taught me not to push equipment past design parameters, I said. Seabees don't take shortcuts with heavy machinery, Navy. Cross glanced at me with new interest, but not the respectful kind. Oh, you're one of those guys. Look, I appreciate your service and everything, but this isn't Fallujah. It's a construction beam. The disrespect hit harder than I expected. Not just for me, but for every Marine and sailor who'd ever trusted their life to equipment I'd maintained. Tommy Rodriguez deserved better than being dismissed as paranoia by some trust fund kid who'd never lifted anything heavier than a laptop. Tony shifted uncomfortably beside me. Wade's been operating cranes for 28 years, Mr. Cross. If he says it's unsafe, then we get someone who says it is safe. Cross interrupted, turning back to his camera. Crisis management, people. This is how you pivot when the old guard tries to slow down progress. I pulled out my incident report pad, the small green notebook every union operator carries. Another habit from the Navy, where documentation keeps you alive when officers start pointing fingers. I wrote down the time, the bearing condition, and Cross's response to my safety concerns. Every detail matters when lawyers get involved. Mr. Cross, I said, clicking my pen closed. I'm red tagging this crane per OSHA regulation 1926.1400. No operator may use equipment with known defects that could affect safe operation. Cross's face changed. The social media smile vanished, replaced by something uglier. Real money was involved now, not just content creation. You know what? You're fired. He pointed a manicured finger toward the gate. Tony, get him off my sight, now. Tony looked like he'd swallowed something sour. Sir, I don't think that's the best. I'm not paying you to think, Tony. I'm paying you to manage this crew. Cross pulled out his phone, scrolling through an app. There's got to be someone on CraneShare who actually wants to work. CraneShare, the Uber of construction equipment, where any operator with a commercial license could bid on jobs through their smartphone. No union protection, no safety standards, just whoever bid lowest and fastest. Mr. Cross, I said, my voice dropping to the tone I'd used with Marines who thought they knew better than their NCO. If you bring in a gig operator who doesn't know this equipment, you're making a mistake that's going to cost more than time. Get off my property, Cross yelled, his voice cracking with the strain. He turned back to his camera, which had been recording the entire exchange. Sorry about the drama, tech crowd. Sometimes you have to make tough leadership decisions. I looked at Tony one more time. He was a good supervisor, but he had a mortgage and kids in college. Cross held his paycheck, and we both knew it. Don't let them do it, Tony, I said quietly. That bearing's going to fail. Tony just shook his head. I can't stop him, Wade. You know how these developers are? I walked back to my truck, but I didn't leave. Instead, I called Howard Beck, my union steward. Howard had been fighting for operating engineers for 20 years, knew every regulation and every legal protection we had. Wade, what's the situation? Howard's voice was gravelly from 3 decades of construction sites and union hall meetings. Site owner just fired me for red tagging unsafe equipment, drum bearing failure on the main hoist. Now he's calling in a scab operator through some app. Howard was quiet for a moment, thinking, you document everything. Got it all in my incident book. Times, conditions, witnesses, even his response on record. Good. That's wrongful termination for safety compliance. We can file a grievance, but more importantly, we need to protect whoever they bring in to replace you. He's live streaming the whole thing, Howard. Whatever happens is going to be on camera. Even better, social media evidence holds up in court these days. Wade, get yourself to a safe distance and document everything. If that crane fails, we're going to need proof it wasn't your fault. I moved my truck across the street to a parking lot that gave me a clear view of the construction site. Through my windshield, I could see Cross pacing around his silver Tesla Model S Plaid, still talking to his phone camera about disrupting traditional construction culture. 25 minutes later, a beat-up Honda Civic pulled onto the site. Young guy hopped out, maybe 30, wearing a generic hard hat that looked fresh from the store. He was carrying a tablet showing his CraneShare profile, ready to undercut union wages for gig work. Luis Morales, according to the app Cross was showing him, 4.7-star rating, 89 completed lifts, available immediately for premium rates. What the rating didn't show was experience with drum bearing failures or 12-ton vintage steel beams. You the emergency operator? Cross asked, extending his hand. Yes, sir. Double rate, cash payment, just like the app promised. Cross was already pulling out his phone, switching to livestream mode. All right, tech crowd, crisis averted. This is Luis, and he's going to help us make this lift happen. Sometimes you need fresh blood instead of old excuses. Luis didn't do a pre-operation inspection, didn't check the drum, the cables, or the load ratings. Just scrambled up the ladder like he was racing against time, which I guess he was. Gig economy doesn't pay for thorough safety checks. I pulled out my phone and started recording. If this went sideways, I wanted evidence that I wasn't anywhere near that crane when it happened. Down below, Cross had positioned himself right next to his Tesla, phone extended, filming the entire operation for his audience. His car was parked directly in the swing radius, the area where loads travel overhead. Basic construction safety says never park under the hook, but Cross wasn't basic construction. Look at this beautiful piece of engineering. Cross narrated to his camera, gesturing at the 12-ton beam. This vintage steel is going to be the centerpiece of the most Instagram-worthy loft space in the city. Sometimes you have to fight through old-school resistance to create something amazing. The crane fired up with a diesel rumble that echoed off the surrounding buildings. Luis swung the jib over to the flatbed truck where the beam was waiting. The riggers, clearly nervous about the rush timeline, attached the lifting cables with quick, professional movements. Cross kept filming, walking around his Tesla to get different angles. This is what happens when you bring modern thinking to traditional industries. Instead of spending 2 days on excessive safety theater, we're solving problems in real time. The beam lifted clean off the truck bed, 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet into the air. Luis was moving fast, trying to impress his new client. The load swayed slightly as it crossed over the construction zone, but that was normal for a beam that size. Then I heard it through my open truck window, the grinding shriek of metal under stress, followed by a sharp crack like a rifle shot. The drum bearing hadn't gradually failed. It had seized completely, locking the cable drum in place while 12 tons of steel beam swung like a pendulum at the end of the line. Luis hit the emergency brake, but emergency brakes don't argue with physics. When 12 tons of steel wants to swing, it swings. The beam pendulum edged through a 40-foot arc, picking up speed as it carved through the air at 35 miles per hour. Cross was still filming when it hit. The beam didn't strike his Tesla dead on. If it had, Cross would have been paced on the pavement. Instead, it clipped the front quarter panel, tearing through the carbon fiber like tissue paper and slamming into the concrete with a sound like thunder. But that wasn't the real show. The impact triggered every safety system Tesla had built into their flagship sedan. Emergency flashers strobed like a disco, alarms shrieked loud enough to wake the dead, and the car's computer started sending automatic crash notifications to every emergency service in a 50-mile radius. Then the lithium battery pack, damaged by the beam's impact, decided to demonstrate why fire departments hate electric vehicle accidents. The Tesla didn't burn, it erupted. Lithium-ion thermal runaway is like watching compressed hell escape from a metal box. White-hot flames shot 20 feet into the air, accompanied by toxic smoke that turned the sky black within seconds. The temperature at the car's center hit 1,500 degrees, hot enough to melt aluminum. Cross jumped back from the inferno, still holding his phone, still live-streaming, his voice climbing into panic territory. "Oh no, oh no, oh no, that's a $135,000 car. Chat, are you seeing this? This is not supposed to happen. This is not supposed to happen." The beam had come to rest in the parking lot, gouging a 6-inch furrow through asphalt before settling like a steel gravestone. Luis was climbing down from the crane cab, shaking so hard I could see it from across the street. I kept my phone recording everything. The burning Tesla, Cross's livestream meltdown, workers running for cover from the toxic smoke. This wasn't just a construction accident anymore. This was an environmental hazard with thousands of people watching it happen in real time. Cross kept filming even as the fire department sirens grew louder. You could hear him trying to spin the disaster for his audience, his influencer training kicking in despite the chaos. Guys, this is unscripted content at its finest. Real-time crisis management in the construction industry. Sometimes innovation means dealing with unexpected variables. The fire department arrived first, followed by hazmat teams and paramedics. Lithium battery fires require special foam and breathing apparatus. Regular water just spreads the chemicals around and makes the situation worse. I climbed out of my truck and walked back toward the site. Cross saw me coming and pointed his phone camera in my direction, trying to control his narrative. And here's the operator who refused to do the lift. He announced to his livestream audience, "Wade, do you want to comment on what just happened?" I stopped 20 feet away from the burning car and pulled out my incident report notebook. The drum bearing failed exactly as I predicted at 10:47 a.m. I documented the defect, reported it to supervision, and was terminated for refusing unsafe operation. Cross's face went white under the soot and sweat. "You sabotaged my crane." "No, sir. I was across the street when the failure occurred. Your livestream proves I was nowhere near that equipment." That's when Cross realized his own social media obsession had created a permanent record of every bad decision he'd made. Every dismissive comment about safety, every order to proceed despite warnings, every moment of his arrogance was preserved in digital amber for the world to see. The OSHA investigator arrived in a black SUV, stepping out with the kind of authority that makes contractors nervous. Edward Griffin, according to his badge. He'd seen industrial accidents before, but the live-stream nature of this disaster was something new. "Mr. Cross," Griffin said, pulling out a tablet. "I understand you're the project owner." "Yes, and I want to file a complaint about equipment sabotage." Griffin looked at the smoking remains of the Tesla, then at the 12-ton beam resting in the parking lot. "Sir, this is now a federal accident investigation. I need you to stop filming and step away from the scene. I have rights. This is my property, not anymore. This is a hazardous materials incident." Environmental Protection Agency has jurisdiction over the battery fire, OSHA has jurisdiction over the crane failure, and local fire department has jurisdiction over everything until we determine the site is safe. Griffin walked over to where Tony was standing with the other workers. "I need to speak with whoever red-tagged this equipment." Tony pointed at me. "Wade Harrison. He's the operator who shut down the crane this morning." Griffin approached me with professional interest. "Mr. Harrison, you filed a safety report." "Yes, sir." I handed him my incident notebook. Tapered roller bearing failure on the main drum assembly. I documented the defect, reported it to site supervision, and refused to operate unsafe equipment. Griffin flipped through my notes, comparing timestamps with Cross's livestream footage on his phone, and "You were terminated for this refusal immediately." Mr. Cross hired a replacement operator through a gig economy app. Griffin's expression shifted from professional interest to barely controlled anger. He hired an unlicensed contractor for heavy machinery operation. Lewis has a commercial license, but no experience with this specific crane model or drum-bearing failures. Griffin turned back toward Cross, who was still trying to livestream damage control to his increasingly hostile audience. The comments section of his feed had turned into a roast session, with viewers pointing out every safety violation they could spot. "Mr. Cross," Griffin called out, "I'm issuing an immediate stop work order for this entire site. Nobody touches anything until we complete our investigation." Cross's voice went up an octave. "You can't do that? Do you know how much money I'm losing every day this project is delayed? You just created an environmental disaster while live streaming safety violations. Money is the least of your problems." The EPA hazmat team was suiting up in full protective gear to deal with the battery chemicals. The lithium fire would burn for hours, and the contaminated soil would need professional remediation. Cross's luxury loft conversion had just become a Superfund cleanup site. 3 months later, I was sitting on my back deck overlooking Lake Michigan, watching the sunset paint the water orange and gold. The wrongful termination lawsuit had settled for $185,000. Cross's insurance company had reviewed his livestream footage and discovered something beautiful. Willful safety violations void coverage clauses. Emma was home from college for Thanksgiving break, studying mechanical engineering at Michigan Tech. Smart girl, smarter than her old man, she understood stress analysis and load calculations better than most operators I'd worked with. "Dad, did you see Cross made the news again?" She held up her laptop screen. I had seen it. Jackson Cross's bankruptcy filing had become a case study in how social media can destroy your life in real time. His live stream of the Tesla fire had gone viral for all the wrong reasons. 3.2 million views of a tech mogul's empire crumbling while he provided running commentary. The environmental cleanup costs killed him, Emma said, scrolling through the article. EPA fined him $2.8 million for improper hazardous waste disposal. Apparently, lithium battery fires create some nasty chemical runoff. Cross had tried everything to avoid responsibility. Counter lawsuits, claims of equipment sabotage, attempts to blame Luis for operator error. But his own livestream was evidence exhibit A. Every dismissive comment about safety, every order to proceed despite warnings, every moment of his arrogance preserved in digital form. You know what the best part is? Emma asked. He's working at a cell phone store now. Someone posted a TikTok of him explaining data plans to teenagers. I pulled off my work gloves and set them on the deck railing. Same gloves I'd worn in Iraq, Same ones that had felt the drum-bearing failure that morning. Some tools last a lifetime if you take care of them. The union had backed my lawsuit from day one. Howard Beck had connected me with a labor attorney who specialized in wrongful termination cases. When you have video evidence of safety retaliation, the legal system moves fast. Emma, I said, you remember when you were little, and I'd take you to the construction sites. You'd always make me wear a hard hat, even just to visit. You know why? She looked at me with the patience of a daughter who'd heard this story before, because safety isn't negotiable. That's right, and it cost Cross everything because he thought it was. The settlement money had covered Emma's remaining college tuition with enough left over for a comfortable early retirement. I'd started teaching safety courses for new crane operators, sharing 28 years of experience with kids who thought smartphones made them smarter than physics. My first class had been at the Union Training Center, 20 apprentices fresh out of high school. I'd started by showing them Cross's live stream footage. This is what happens when you let management pressure override safety protocols. I told them, 12 tons of steel doesn't care about your deadline. The video always got their attention. Watching a $135,000 car go up in flames tends to focus young minds on the consequences of equipment failure. I'd pause it at the moment the bearing seized, explain the mechanical stress that caused the failure. Now watch the operator's response, I'd tell them. Luis hit the emergency brake, which was correct procedure. But emergency brakes don't stop physics. The lesson isn't that Luis made a mistake. The lesson is that he never should have been put in that position. Teaching felt like completing a circle. Every apprentice I trained was another Tommy Rodriguez who might make it home safe. Every safety protocol I taught was another family that wouldn't get a knock on their door from the military chaplain. The construction industry was changing. Gig economy apps were trying to turn skilled trades into Uber rides. Companies like Crosstech treated experienced workers like interchangeable parts. But steel and concrete don't care about your business model. They obey physics, not profit margins. Emma closed her laptop and joined me at the deck railing. Are you going to miss it? The crane work? I looked at my hands, calloused from 3 decades of moving steel through the sky. I miss the craft. The precision of placing a 12-ton beam exactly where it needs to go. But I don't miss the pressure to cut corners. The sun was almost down now, just a sliver of orange on the horizon. Somewhere across the lake, a crane operator was making decisions about equipment safety, probably under pressure from someone who'd never operated anything heavier than a laptop. You know what Cross called me that day? I asked Emma. Old school, like it was an insult. But old school means you knew the difference between a bearing that could hold 12 tons and one that was about to fail. Exactly. Emma headed inside to study for her finals. Stress analysis and materials science. The same principles I'd learned through experience. She was learning through equations. Both paths led to the same truth. Respect the limits of what you're working with. I picked up the local paper, not looking for work but curious about the industry I'd spent my life in. Cross's bankruptcy had made the business section right next to an ad for crane operators. Experience required, it said. Safety-focused candidates preferred. Good. Maybe the next generation would learn to respect the iron before the iron taught them the hard way. Listen, if you're in the trades or you manage people who work with dangerous equipment, here's what I learned from 28 years of moving steel and one live stream disaster. Your gut knows when something's wrong, when the equipment feels off, when the timeline's too tight, when the boss is pushing too hard. Trust that feeling. Document everything, follow your training, and don't let anyone pressure you into cutting corners. Because gravity doesn't care about your deadline, and it definitely doesn't care about your social media followers. The machine will tell you what it can handle. Listen to it. Your life and everyone around you depends on it.